Hi everyone, nice to see you here. I am very happy about the papers that have been presented earlier because I will base a lot of my ideas on them. So you already kind of have a background knowledge of what I am supposed to say. I'm also very happy that I made it here because yesterday I talked with Volker on the phone when I was in airport in Helsinki, no plane for me. And Volker said, I will give you a presentation if you don't come. And I would have loved that because all the slides are pink, and I would have loved him to see giving a lecture with pink slides. But happily, I made it, so he is spare of that. So ancestry and identity in the Balkans and the Carpathian Basin, and given how eager people were to talk about identity in the morning, I'm already freaking out, so bear with me here. Let's see if we find any solution to our archaeological problems. How did this start? It started basically with me chasing genetic papers. Every time there was a new genetic paper, I was, okay, let's see what individuals, from where, how do they look? And my reactions were, okay, or, okay, it makes sense, interesting, intriguing. So from all these reactions to how the samples, the individuals were looking, and the ancestry, I said, okay, maybe we can go a bit deeper into that. And we have made a small article together with Johan Digman from Mainz. And we have studied this area of the Balkans and the Carpathian Basin. We took all the samples from 5,000 to 2,500 BC from mounds and flat graves. So all this comes from published genetic data. We had a total sample of 97. More of them for the earlier period, but here we are interested in the period between 3,500 to 2,500. Here we only had 36 samples, and we aimed to investigate the relationship between genetic ancestry of individuals and the burial practices performed at their death. And here, from the very beginning, we have the problem of labeling. But what we have found out is that basically that the relation between genetic ancestry of individuals and their identity as expressed in burial practices should not be assumed, but rather investigated on a case-by-case basis. And we had a very simple approach for that study because we only had 36 samples for 1,000 years and for a huge area. So we had a very gross oversimplification, don't do it, approach of okay, everything that is in a mound, we call it Pontic-Caspian steppe burial practices, right? Because we have this practice of building burial mounds coming from the steppe in this period, and the rest, what is flat graves in all these various cultures and countries, we call them Balkan Carpathian Basin specific. If you want local and foreign, but we have tried to escape these terms because they are very, very loaded. So we have defined two groups based on burial practices, and already with a small number of samples, we have seen that, okay, we have individuals that have steppe genetic ancestry, and they are buried according to steppe burial practices, which makes sense. We also have graves of individuals with Aegean farmer and Balkan hunter-gatherer ancestry that are buried according to various local practices in this region, which also makes sense. But we also had individuals with steppe ancestry that were buried in ways that did not acknowledge this steppe origin or the idea of a steppe origin in any way, and they were buried according to local practices. And we had individuals without any steppe ancestry that did have this. They are distributed mostly in Bulgaria and Hungary, while in other regions we only have a very small number of samples. And just to point out already that here you have an outlier burial mound somewhere in Albania. That is actually quite an interesting case study. And what is the aim? So the aim is to focus on the arrival of steppe-related genetic ancestry from the Pontic-Caspian steppe into the Balkans and the Carpathian Basin during the 4th and 3rd millennia BC, and what's the impact on the burial practices. And we want to explore aspects of individual and group identity, because, as we know, the dead do not bury themselves, and the relationship between descent and identities by bringing together this information. We have to have two things in mind here. First, that we have genetic ancestry on the one side and the mortuary practices on the other, but in between we have a life of the person who has lived. And so first, we have to keep in mind that biological ancestry or biological relatedness, someone having parents with steppe origins, doesn't necessarily, I mean, of course we can think about it as kinship, but kinship is also contextually specific and a much more fluid concept, on the one hand. So having steppe parents or grandparents doesn't necessarily mean you have a steppe lifestyle, you have grown in the steppe and so on. Other things can happen, we never know. And second is that the identity of the deceased undergoes a transformation during the mortuary practices. And as we know, mortuary practices might or might not reflect the identity of the deceased during the lifetime. So we still have a big portion in between that we need to take into account. And now what are the challenges and the limitations of this study? They are not few, so let's see if in the end it's useful in any way. First is the sample number, and we have 59 samples that cover a millennium and a huge area. So the sample number is still quite small. Then they are unevenly distributed, as I said, focusing mostly on Bulgaria and Hungary, and actually many of them coming from flat graves and less from burial mounds. Sample selection is relatively random, and I think that this is a major aspect that should be discussed. And of course, we are always grateful for any sample that is published because it's extremely interesting for us archaeologists. But sometimes we are having not puzzle pieces, but half pieces, meaning that sometimes in double graves we only have one individual, or we only have this very, very, how to say, tiny, tiny window that we can look through, because sampling so far has been done without research focus and so on. And of course, this is the state of research. This is where we are. As I said, any sample published is great information to add. But this is how it is for the moment. And there is also a certain vagueness in our study, because drawing conclusions about the underlying population history based on just individual ancestry components is not straightforward. So we can't really say how recent the potential admixture events might be, because different modes of admixture can lead to the same outcome distributions and so on. So it's rather vague in both in terms of time, generations in the past, but also of processes. So very limited in this respect. And then there is a challenge with the archaeological documentation, because in some cases the contexts are not published, they are hard to find, can't find a drawing, can't find a description. Going through all to the dark corners of the internet, still you can't find anything. So then that sample doesn't really help you much as archaeologists to say anything. And then there is also the absence of radiocarbon dates that makes it sometimes challenging to have a more nuanced approach to the chronology. You have seen today with C14 dating, we are really able now to have a very nuanced chronology of what we call pre-Yamnaya, early Yamnaya, developed Yamnaya, late Yamnaya, and so on. And when you don't have C14 for the samples, this gets a bit complicated. So any study that also that publishes genetic data and adds radiocarbon dates for the sample is something absolutely amazing, and I am a big fan of. Just to see also another challenge, I have highlighted here this period. This is the classic table that we do with absolute and relative chronology of areas and cultures. So as we can see, we also have a very fragmented landscape. Different cultures in various regions and even various chronologies, while we are already in the early Bronze Age in Bulgaria, in Hungary, we still wait for many hundreds of years for what we define as Bronze Age to start, and so on. So that's also another challenge of the data. However, let's start with this microscopic approach and just look at some individuals, some case studies, and then we can take it from there. So I have divided my period in two phases. And the first one is 3,300, 2,900. It has been mentioned earlier as well. I would date what we call pre-Yamnaya graves in this phase, and then starting from 3,100, we have Yamnaya graves as well, so they are like partially contemporary. So this is, I think, a good segment to give us an idea about our individuals. And here I have two flat graves from Bulgaria, one from Smiadovo. It's earlier in the first part of this interval, the second is later in the second part. And these are flat graves. I mean, we can talk with Stefan, but I think these are assigned, at least the Sabrano one, to the local early Bronze Age, also based on the pottery. Although we already see here these wonderful herrings that we have been discussing about, so there are objects that we can consider that they have steppe origins. But the burial ritual, I think it's assigned to the local Bronze Age, and as we can see from the admixture proportions, there is no steppe ancestry here, so some local graves with what we can say local Aegean farmer and Iron Gates hunter-gatherer ancestry. If we look at Baden graves, and there are a lot of Baden graves in our samples, we see kind of the same thing. So this is an iconic cemetery for the Baden culture, and again, a lack of steppe ancestry in these individuals. So maybe no big surprise here. But what happens in this time frame is that we also have the emergence of the first burial mounds, and we have these early ones that we have been discussing here, the late 4th millennium one that we can also call pre-Yamnaya, although we are not necessarily very happy with this term, but for me it's more like a chronological horizon. Definitely I don't use it with the term with the meaning of an archaeological culture. So we have the emergence of these burial mounds, which supposedly, or which should show a strong steppe influence. So then let's look at individuals from this mound and let's see what we find out. And the first example comes from Hungary, and it's from Mezőcsát Horcsogös-halom. And this is a kurgan built on top of a Baden cemetery. And we have 4 individuals here. And as has been mentioned already, we can see a variability of the burial ritual. Some individuals are on their back. One is actually in very intriguing sitting position, has Felden in the front. So we do have some step elements of the burial ritual here. There is a kurgan and some of the practices that we usually associate with the steppe area. However, as you see in these individuals, there's barely any steppe ancestry. So admixture proportion showing mostly Aegean farmer. Another example comes from Muntenia, from the Prahova area. And here you can see this individual, again, a combination of Iron Gates hunter-gatherer and Aegean farmer in a burial mound in Ploiești. It's an adult female in a crouched on the side position, oriented to the north. There is a bit of ochre there. We have a C14 that places it in the second part of this pre-Yamnaya horizon. And of course, this grave doesn't say much, just that there is no steppe ancestry here. But this grave is not alone. So this grave is part of a very clearly defined horizon of burials, and it has been described here today as well. But it takes this pre-Yamnaya horizon a very, very specific form in the Prahova area, I would say. So we have individuals that are crouched on the side. We have individual burials, but also a lot of multiple burials. And in these burials, the individuals can be either in anatomic connection or post-mortem muddy manipulation is attested in numerous cases, as Piotr said, digging the ancestors. And what is special about this area are the grave goods. So we have 3 flanged axes, 3 copper spectacle-shaped pendants, and we have Kotsofeni-related pottery, and so on. So very specific, let's say, print of of these graves. Now, I'm not saying that all these individuals will present the same ancestry as the one in Ploiești. I'm saying that I'm looking forward to see the samples published from these graves. But the archaeologists who excavated the graves, Dr. Alin Frânculasa from the Prahova Museum, he has interpreted these individuals as part of a community with very strong ties with the Kotzofeni and Baden area, who creates a new burial ritual by adopting elements from the steppe. And I mean here this idea of a primary grave under a mound. Sometimes they use a voker, the presence of these early hair rings. In this area we have gravel under the soil, and sometimes they use the gravel from the pit to make a stone ring, as we have seen for mounds of the 4th millennium in other regions as well, but maybe with stones. So archaeologically, this is a combination of some local Baden-Kotzofeni component with steppe influences, but at least from the individual in Ploiești, we don't see any steppe genetic ancestry. And then if we go in Bulgaria, again we have the Beli Briag, and this is grave 3 that I think Stefan and Piotr have included in their study, also about this local component of developing burial mounds. And as you can see, no steppe ancestry in the individuals from Beli Briag. But the interesting one is the one from Mednikarovo. Piotr and Stefan put him in this group of east-oriented early graves that they tie to the local environment. But as we can see, actually, this individual does have steppe ancestry. And it's east-oriented. The grave pit is oval and so on. So it doesn't follow this super, super strict definition of what we have named Yamna in this region. And then we do have graves with individuals that have steppe ancestry. And if we look at them archaeologically, yes, they do fit more with this narrow definition that has been presented several times here today. I wanted to say about this Voilovița central grave that it is a grave of a woman, in case you wanted to see a primary grave of a female after the last lecture. So these are the samples that we have so far, and they do seem to follow the rules, the rules that we presume, or what we call Yamnaya typical burial ritual. Another interesting case study is the one from Merișleri of individuals 4 and 6, and I have to say that these were published in 2 different papers. So first it was the individual 6, we have the picture there, and then I had to wait for some years for the next individual to be published as well, and it was a very interesting surprise. So individual number 6 is this male, again east-west oriented, put in a supine position, so taking some of these steppe elements in the burial ritual, but also having a local pot, and at least from the point of view of ancestry, we can see here that it's actually the Aegean farmer component that predominates. What is interesting is that above this individual, 25 centimeters above it, there was another grave. And at least according to the archaeologists, these 2 individuals have been buried in the same pit. So from this description, I understand that they consider it intentional act. And the other individual, unfortunately, I don't have a picture, is number 4. It's a subadult female. It's west-east oriented. It's described as hawker position on the left side, which, without seeing it, it's hard for me to define more. And red ochre on the skull and the feet, and no grave goods. So following a bit more what we call Yamnaya burial ritual, and as we see from the admixture proportion, it is 100% defined as this steppe Yamnaya ancestry. And I think that this is extremely important because Piotr and Stefan have also talked about these graves with 2 levels in which 2 individuals were placed. But here we have 2 individuals with 2 different burial rituals and definitely two different origins. And putting them together in the same pit, if it was an intentional act, I think it's a very significant act, and it's very interesting to notice. And then now we are in a later phase. This grave that I want to present is a flat grave from Târgșorul Vechi. We are again in Romania, in northern Muntenia. As you can see, it's dated contemporary to the latest phase of Yamnaya burials in this region, and it also shows a combination of Iron Gates hunter-gatherer and Aegean farmer ancestry. No step ancestry at all, so it is a flat grave, crouched on the side. The pot has been assigned to the local Glina Bronze Age culture. And what is actually extremely interesting is that this grave is literally surrounded. It's in a sea of kurgans. This area has been, as you know, very well researched. And we have this grave here, and all the red dots are excavated kurgans, and there are multiple other dots of unexcavated kurgans. So we are in an area where this individual doesn't show any admixture event at any point in the past, no step ancestry. But we are in an area that has been dominated by kurgans for 600 years and dominated by Yamnaya burial ritual for 400 years. And I have put there another contemporary grave from Aricești I, which is one of the latest Yamnaya graves, and you can see that they are contemporary, and here we talk about some dozens of kilometers, this whole area. Maybe there are less than 10 kilometers between the two graves. So putting it into context, it's extremely interesting because it gives us the opportunity to think about interactions with some sort of local environment that was invisible for some centuries, but now it's starting to appear in graves like this. And we haven't explored, actually, how the Yamnaya were interacting with local population. And of course, that we do not have samples from the Yamnaya graves in this region, so that I can tell you they are 100% step ancestry or something like that. But if we look at the burial ritual, you can see the amazing variability, which doesn't exist. They are literally all the same, and I haven't selected some that are alike. All the graves, this is the easiest region maybe to interpret. All the graves in that region look the same for the entire period of the Yamnaya culture. So west, east, supine, hands along the body, the rectangular pit, and so on. We don't have the complexity and the variability in other regions, but it's really, really homogeneous, I think I can say. And then another example for which I extended a bit my period is the jar burials. And these are in tel settlements in Bulgaria. They are dated to the early Bronze Age 3 period, so after the Yamnaya. But this was an extremely interesting case study for me. So what are jar burials? Are burials of subadults or fetus that are buried in ceramic vessels. They are usually related to houses. They are either under house floors or between the houses, buried in pots, sometimes in crouched positions, but sometimes, of course, it's like very difficult to identify. And the complex study of these graves showed that there is a semi-articulation of the skeletal remains, so probably partial decomposition before the individuals being placed in the pots. Maybe practices of dismemberment are also present, and a sort of processing of the dead before the burial. And we have 11 individuals from this type of burial ritual. 5 are from Tel Crân, 5 from Ezero, and 1 from Nova Zagora. I couldn't find detailed information about each of these graves, unfortunately, because in the literature sometimes they are like taken all together and just some examples mentioned. So where you see the lines there, I simply couldn't find any information. But there is no reason to believe that these burials had any differences between them. From an archaeological standpoint, the burial ritual is the same for all these individuals. However, what is interesting is that if we look at the ancestry components, then they are rather different. And what we can observe is that in Tel Krân, there is virtually no steppe ancestry, while in E0 and in Nova Zagora, we do have in significant proportion and in several individuals. So I would say that it's not a coincidence. So based on this, Jens observed, and he said that it could be that these individuals originate from different populations. And what I say is that maybe they originate from different patterns or processes of interaction. And I have talked to Stefan about these sites, and I think he's right. The fact that there is a mountain between E0 and Krân might play a role in this. So E0 and Nova Zagora being still in the plain, in a region where we have kurgans, while Krân is beyond the mountain. So definitely this has played a role. So about what Niels was saying earlier, when we talk what is regional, maybe this is something regional, a regional difference that we can notice, and we wouldn't have noticed it unless for this very extensive sampling. And what I want to say that it's in this case, for these individuals, the steppe ancestry is not acknowledged in any way in the burial practice. All the babies were probably selected according to the same criteria, and they were buried absolutely the same, regardless of this genetic component. And then the case study from Albania. This is extremely interesting. Several mounds were excavated there, but only 2 dated from the Bronze Age, Mound 1 and Mound 10. And this is the primary grave from Mound 1. And as you can see here, it looks familiar. So there is a rectangular pit. There is a construction with stone. That is true. The individual is in supine position. There is no ochre and no grave goods. But definitely from the point of view of burial practices, you could say that there is a steppe component here. And the other mound, Mound 10, contained 3 graves that were dated to the early Bronze Age. This is the primary grave of the mound. Again, we have a rectangular pit. We have a construction on the side with stones. And what is actually even more intriguing here is that the excavator said that they have identified this layer, a horizontal layer of white clay sealing the grave. So after the grave was done, they have sealed with just a layer of white clay the entire surface, who also probably was a border of the mound, because they have built the mound exactly in that region. And this is something actually that we notice in kurgans in the steppe as well, this plastering of the surface, I don't know how to call it. For the individual for which we have genetic analysis, we don't have any illustration, unfortunately. We have a date, and we see it's dating 2600, 2400, but this is a secondary grave, so a later one. Maybe the other ones, they could be earlier. And we see also a significant amount of steppe ancestry here. But in the case of this individual, because we can notice some very clear elements of steppe burial practices, the construction of the burial mound, the arrangement of the grave pit, even though it was kind of adapted to the local environment, we're using stones instead of wood, the arrangement of the clay for the position of the individuals. We can say here that there was a memory or an identity of this community, some memory of steppe burial practices, because they were very keen on doing all these construction works, although it's already transforming because it's a bit outside the steppe area. But in this case, the genetic ancestry and the burial practices do meet somewhere, and I think this is interesting. And then we also have some individuals with steppe ancestry in Croatia that are buried in local contexts, again, without any indication that they knew anything about their steppe origins. But again, unfortunately, for instance, for this individual here with the most amount of steppe ancestry, it's one of the individuals in this pit. I don't know which one. This is everything that we have. So we can't really say more about how they were buried. Okay. And now what if we want to zoom out? Because we have been looking at all these case studies, and they are extremely interesting and extremely fascinating. But what if we want to take a step back and try to identify some patterns? Then what do we do? And we have to label things again. So here you see the distribution of steppe ancestry among two different groups. So what we have called Balkan Carpathian Basin burial practices, so the local ones, and Pontic-Caspian steppe. And here we have just lumped everything that is in a kurgan together. Here the orange is the median value. And the differences between the two groups are still statistically significant. But then if we add another layer and we define as Pontic-Caspian steppe only the Yamnaya graves with this very narrow definition that you have heard all over again today, and that at least for the western area seems to apply. West-east orientation, wooden structure, mat, ochre, supine position, hands along the body, and so on. And if we put all these graves that we have defined as pre-Yamnaya, for instance, in a category that we call mixed, because I have no other word for it, if you have a better one. Okay, so thinking about these burials where we do have some steppe influences, they are in kurgans and so on, but we suspect a local component, and there is much more variability, then what we see actually is that there is no difference between what we call local graves and these graves here, which are, for instance, now in our sample are mostly what we call pre-Yamnaya. So pre-Yamnaya graves in kurgan from this early period, actually in terms of ancestry, they look very much like the local individuals, while if we define Pontic-Caspian steppe burial practices in a very narrow way as Yamnaya, we see the huge difference. We have two outliers here, and one of them is the one from Albania, which I put into this mixed category because it's still a transforming burial practice, and the other one is the east-oriented grave that we were talking about. So I don't know if this is a good way of looking at things. I don't even know if it matters, I have to tell you, very honestly. But just as a very short, I think I'm beyond time, conclusion. So sampling should be done from very clearly documented archaeological contexts, and maybe in the future it could be strategic, as in it could answer specific research questions, such as, are individuals buried in kurgans biologically related or not? Are kurgans places where people and community with different origins just come and build layers there? And then, of course, we have interdisciplinary approaches to provide details about the life of individual. So, although at a broad scale it seems that burial practices are very homogeneous, if we zoom in, then there is actually a lot of variability and a certain fuzziness. And we should be interested in researching this fuzziness as well, because it tells us about transformation of burial practices, about regional changes, innovation, interactions, and so on. And then how do we switch from these particular regional case studies to supra-regional patterns? So how do we formalize this? We still need to put some labels on our samples, although maybe not archaeological culture, but other sort of label. And then, yeah, we could define elements of burial practices and see how they combine in different packages, which we have done today. The form of the pit, the orientation, the presence or absence of ochre, and so on. But there will still be a variability, and how to incorporate that without creating an infinite numbers of categories to try to analyze our graves. And I will end with a quote from my very good friend Piotr Vlodarsak, who told me the other day, I have started doubting everything. So this is my presentation. Thank you very much.